Yes, there we go. Floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. My name is Damiano. I work at the Brooklyn STEAM Center as a teacher and director of programs, but today I am your Career Pathways Portal guru. And today's particular topic is focused on work-based learning and how there are some specific vocabulary and terminology we have to use in our platform because different things have different rules, and we always want to be on the smiley face of legal. So before we get into that, though, I just wanted to give you kind of our agenda of what's going to happen today. And then, of course, there'll be times to pause for questions, as well as support for any other issues afterwards. So the first part of the agenda is going to be just, your general resources and what you need to get yourself started, especially if you don't have me or a recording like this for exactly what you're going to need. Because there are people on the CTE district team that want to help you and certainly will bend over backwards to make it happen. However, they're not always available. And so we'll talk about resources that you can also use asynchronously. The second thing we'll do is we'll break down the difference between an experience and a quote unquote activity. These are all work-based learning opportunities, but for the purposes of putting them in the Career Pathways portal, they are different. And we'll see why, because experiences have a little bit more legalese to them. And then lastly, the major thing that we'll probably spend most of our time is how to log work-based learning beyond the experiences into the system, so that way you know exactly what you're doing. So in a moment, you'll see the screen come up, and what you should be seeing is the Career Pathways portal homepage. Now, if you're new to this or you've never seen it before, the Career Pathways portal is your centralized location as a comprehensive system for almost anything any career and technical education program is going to need, with a few exceptions like programming students into their schedules, but you're still, of course, going to keep doing through STARS. But you'll be able to do things like upload program quality documents, maintain student accounts, including their employability profile and career plan, et cetera, et cetera. Now, for today, because it's all about the work-based learning aspect, there's a few key resources that are available to you. The first one, of course, is going to be our legendary Career Pathways Portal Handbook. This thing is a monster, okay? It's got about 300 plus pages, but fortunately, you can skip around to what you're going to need. Going down to the table of contents, you can see that just about anything you're going to need to be able to do in this platform, you can find here. Now, for the purposes of today, most things will happen in the activities tab because we're talking about work-based learning opportunities. But of course, if you need something else, you just got to find the right page for it. And just by clicking on it, it'll bring you to that section of the document where you can further jump to specific actions, as well as these links to videos. These videos range from 2 to 4 minutes on average, somewhere in the middle, definitely. And they are my humble voice explaining to you how to do the thing that's in these steps. So if you really need to hear it as opposed to read it or looking at pictures, a side-by-side tutorial may be the style for you to be able to do the things that you need to do. Of course, beyond the Career Pathways portal, you may still have questions about work-based learning and things like that. And so besides being able to contact our experts at the district office through our staff contacts link, you can also find a lot of the key information about work-based learning opportunities on our grid. The grid illustrates for you a comprehensive list of New York State Education Department recognized opportunities that scholars can participate in and obtain work-based learning hours for, with relation to the CTE technical endorsement or CDOS, such as the 54-hour requirement / metric. This grid, which is broken down in a separate tutorial video and professional development series that is located on the Career Pathways portal homepage, we'll be able to further break down what these activities are, who they're generally for, what type of documents you should keep on hand to officiate, and for audit purposes, hold on to serve as evidence, and of course, any considerations or thoughts that go into supporting other types of students, such as those with disabilities or language learning designation status. However, For the purposes of this video and tutorial series, we're going to be talking about more about logging them. So for the most part, we're assuming that as you're watching this video or participating in the live session, that you have some form of work-based learning that you need to record down. It's happened, it's done. And so that's where we're going to put our focus. So with regards to our resources, they're right here in the quick link section, and they are there to support you with your questions and concerns when live tutorial sessions are not available. Now moving into the second part and the real meat of our presentation is first, what is the difference between an experience and an activity in the Career Pathways portal? And then afterwards, how to log those appropriately. Now, the information for this is actually highlighted here in the Career Pathways Portal Handbook because we know that this is a very common question. Experiences and activities are both work-based learning opportunities, but an experience is something that requires a little bit more of an administrative control and permission to. This includes opportunities that have payment or compensation involved. So things like an industry-based project, which the City of New York refers to as a workplace challenge or a stipended program, is considered an experience. And any internship, specifically and especially those that are paid, but even those that are paid externally or are unpaid, are all considered experiences. And the primary and true reason for this is because as opposed to something like a guest speaker or a job shadow or something like a school-based enterprise, we're going to need parent permission. We're going to need to ensure that we've verified the safety and health of the employer or the host organization where our young people are engaged. And we need to make sure that the appropriate signatures and acknowledgements of certain financial rules, such as things like I-9 verification or not overpaying students who don't report a social security number, don't come back to bite us in the end. So experiences are specifically set aside as a defense mechanism for schools. So if you can't move forward and issue those things, it means that the system's protecting you. It does require a few additional steps and work to make sure that it happens, but it is all in support of covering our faculty and staff, as well as making sure that we're covering the appropriate quality indicators for some parts of these experiences. Anything else, any of the other work-based learning opportunities on this illustrious grid of ours, in general, would be considered an activity when it comes to the Career Pathways portal. So anything here in the awareness section that ranges from things like a career fair, a guest speaker, or even at the exploration level, like a informational interview, mentoring, are all things that get logged in the activity section of the website, because more often than not, these things are smaller, require less security controls to protect our youth, while also making sure that we're not inundating faculty and staff with what they need to do in the system. These things are typically unpaid, and therefore they don't require the same controls from a financial or legal perspective, and that's why they're separated in the system. So before we dive into how to log an activity, how to do an experience, brief pause. Any clarifying questions or concerns about the difference between an experience and an activity when it comes to the Career Pathways portal?
No, he should be by the elevator.
Okay, you will have the opportunity to answer additional questions later, as well as you can reach out to the appropriate supports at the district office, should you have any types of specific questions. And of course, you can refer back to this video should you need it. So let's begin by figuring out how to log a work-based learning activity. Again, these are things that are not a paid industry-based project or an internship. And so I actually have one ready to go for us coming up in the school year. And that will be something we call a school-based enterprise, we have youth who are going to be conducting a service for community members out in the Brooklyn Navy Yard Industrial Park, in which our computer science students will be providing technical support to those organizations, and our construction students will be fabricating, upon client request, certain furniture items. This happens outside of school. This is something that students are doing to support their community. And eventually, we'd hope to make some income for our programs so that way it's sustainable over time. Now, assuming I've met all of the requirements about what a school-based enterprise is, and I know which students are going to participate, I can now go ahead and start logging that in the platform. In order to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is click on the Activities tab located at the top in the navigation bar. Now, you most definitely can add a new activity automatically. However, if you have multiple people in your school logging different work-based learning activities, my recommendation is to search for it first, so that way folks at schools aren't doubling up on the work. So if I open up my activity search, I look for my particular school and I'm looking for my fabrication team, which is what we call it here. I can see that nothing has been logged at my school for this school year with regards to an activity called fabrication team. I could, of course, use other filters to figure out if it's been done. I can do it by school year, I can do it by activity type, or I can do it by pathway, depending on if I've set it up like that. Seeing as how this activity hasn't been set up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Add New Activity now. Inside the first page, I'm going to need some general details about my activity. At this point, you could do this before the activity even gets started. A lot of people choose to do it afterwards, though, and that's okay too. For something that's a little bit long-standing, though, a school-based enterprise is certainly more than one day. You will probably want to set this up beforehand and have your facilitator frequently log in to take attendance. But if it's something like a guest speaker, which we'll also do as an example, you might just want to do it as part of the class procedure if they're in your classroom. For this, we're going to pick our information. Our school, of course, for most users is just going to be your school. But the next thing is to pick your pathway. Now, if you have, and you're recording for a specific group of students in a particular career and technical education program, you can select that particular pathway. If you are going to have students outside of that pathway also participate, we'll want to go ahead and click school-wide. By clicking pathway, we're able to pre-filter the student names that show up when we attempt to roster them or connect them to this activity. But for some people, you might have multiple students from multiple pathways getting involved. That's okay too. For the purposes of this, I'll go with school-wide. Because we are doing it for this school year, of course, I'm going to pick school year 2022 to 2023. As a reminder, school years start in July and they end in June. So July 2022 to June 2023. If I happen to need to backdate my information, I do have on the dropdown the ability to go back a year or two for right now. I can also give my activity a cool name or something very relevant to what's happening. And so in this example, we're going to, call it our fabrication team because, I'm not too creative at the moment off the top of my head, but that's what they're doing. That's what's happening. And when I think about the organization and the company involved, I'm going to specifically call out the industry partner that's supporting us with that. And this would be our good friend Nathan Santos, who works at a fabrication program pretty local to our school. Beyond that, we will have to pick our activity category. We know that based on the way I've described it and looking at the quality indicators on the work-based learning opportunities grid, this is going to be a school-based enterprise. And I can provide any additional descriptive information necessary. I could link in a Google Doc that explains what the program's about. I could write a short blurb about what we tell partners it is. And you can always come back to update this later. And then finally, we need to set an activity date range. If it's one day, they'll be the same day. If it's over a time period, we are going to establish when and where does it start and stop. So our fabrication team is just running for this month to March. That's our timetable window before we go into the throes of Skills USA. And so once we've got that all set up, we can save the activity. Now, through looking at all of the data collected by schools, a lot of people just stop there. But there's a few more things we need to do to start giving young people the hours or the credit time, the seat time, if you will, for their experience or their activity. You can't just create the activity and you're done. The two things we need to do before we actually take attendance is we have to schedule sessions and we have to set which students are participating. For scheduling, we've got a pretty nifty feature here where it's kind of like a Google Calendar. When you click to add a new session, you don't have to do each date one at a time. First of all, we don't want to waste your whole day doing data entry. But secondly, we know that a lot of programming happens on a pretty particular schedule. Our fabrication team happens 3 days a week. So we're going to do weekly on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. And we know that it's going to be from 3 o'clock right after school to 5 o'clock. And that's when they're going to be making their items. I can also adjust my particular timing should I need to. And so if I know that the program's supposed to start this week, but I'm going to put that it's starting, the week after. And if I know it's going to end a little early, I can do that too. When I go ahead and click save, you can see that not only will it provide all of the schedule in list format, but it will also do so in a calendar format. And we can see, hey, you know what? There's a lot of sessions coming up, but silly Damiano, you forgot about, the winter break. We've got dates here that don't correspond to what I need to do. I'm not going to go back and edit the schedule here and just do like the next 2 weeks and then do another one for another 2 weeks. That's going to blow my mind. That's way too much work. Instead, I'm just going to click on the sessions. And for those that aren't going to happen, I'm going to cancel them. And it will even change the color of the block for that. Now, you might be wondering, why would I do that? Why wouldn't I just leave it and not take attendance for that day? Some people, that's totally fine. That won't change your data at all. But when looking at the meetings times, which lists every single day of the session, if you're going to cancel multiple sessions, it's just a little bit cleaner for you to look at when you're removing some of the dates. You can, of course, also reschedule sessions one at a time. And so if I click on it and click reschedule, it'll say, how do you want me to move these particular sessions? You can also provide reasons to why it's like that. In case there's a person wondering, well, why did you cancel that day? If you're not keeping it in another format and your administrator or those who are orchestrating the work have curiosity to know. When your schedule is set right, the next thing you need to do is roster your students. Now, rostering can be done in a few different ways, but one of the easiest ways is by adding them individually. Now, that's time consuming, okay? But if you are doing a specific class or you're doing a specific group of students, you could say, for example, filter by grade level and program. And for the most part, not completely the case for everybody, but for the most part, you might only have 1 or 2 classes per grade level in a specific program. And so when I see these test students here that don't actually exist, I can assign them to this activity and click save, and they'll show up on the list here. Of course, if I have a larger group of students, or say I have a list that goes beyond more than just one pathway, I can display more students. There are some schools, though, that are even beyond this number. And so we are investigating the ability to increase the size of the maximum students to display. And typically when I'm doing something like logging my external internship program, or I'm trying to do something like an industry-based project that has students from all grade levels, all CTE programs, I'll show all of my students on this list, but instead of scrolling and looking through one at a time, I'll use something like my Command F on a Mac or Control F on a Windows computer to quickly locate the student information. So that way I can drop down to them and then go to the next one. And that way I can easily find them and it will automatically bring me to that section on the page. For me, that's what works. For others, there may be some other tips or tricks that you can offer. But in general, you'll want to assign your students and then from there, always click save. Being very cognizant of the fact that sometimes in these trainings, we don't fully describe everything. It's also important for us to highlight this assignment date range. The assignment date range by default is the full schedule of the activity. So from start to finish as illustrated on that home page. However, there may be times where it benefits you to change the assignment date for a student or a group of students. Say, for example, we have Jana here, Jana Cole, fake test student, and Jana has recently joined or plans to join the fabrication team in January. Instead of telling the system that she'll be starting in December, I can change this to January specifically for her. So that way, when I go to take attendance for the activity, her name isn't going to pop up on the December listings. The same thing could also be true because our fabrication team has to go through an interview process and maintain a certain grade point average. If, let's say our friend Beth over here, is really doing well, but come first marking period of the spring semester, she tanks everything. I could, unfortunately say, I'm sorry, you're not a part of this activity any longer. And I can shorten her assignment date. So that way, when I'm taking attendance later, I'm not saying, did I remember to uncheck her from the attendance? Did I remember, that she's not supposed to be on this list anymore? And that can work out in your favor. There is no limit to rostering, but one of the recommendations that I have for you is if you know that you're going to have an extremely large set of students attached to a singular activity, you may want to think through how you can divide it appropriately. If, for example, you have 150 students participating in the same activity, such as a mentoring program or a guest speaker, and those things are happening at separate times or with separate programs, you could divide them in that way. The only thing we wouldn't want to do is we wouldn't want to establish multiple divisions of an activity, such as a guest speaker for the whole day, and then mark it down as school-wide, when we could be doing it by like junior class, senior class, or pathway by pathway. You also only have to roster students that participated. However, you are more than welcome to roster students that are anticipated to participate. And at least you can demonstrate from a planning perspective that they were intended to be part of this activity, but maybe they didn't attend, they were absent, or something else happened here. Now, finally, and then we'll pause for questions, is the simplest part, which we've done all the setup. The last part is taking attendance. So it is ordered in reverse chronological order. And what we would do is we would select take attendance for a given day. Now, if we're being very realistic about this, our fabrication team only started yesterday, right? So I really should only be able to take attendance for yesterday, December 12th. And so when I open that, I can see here are my students who are assigned for this day. You'll notice that Jana isn't on the list because I said to the program in the roster tab, she doesn't start until January. And I can take attendance for these students in this activity. Now, attendance and who takes attendance will be based on the particular situation and based on a particular school need. For our school, the Brooklyn STEAM Center, class-based activities, those that are happening or being managed or facilitated by a teacher, are logged by the teacher. So even though I, as the work-based learning coordinator, brought in that civil engineer to our engineering program, The teacher, while in the classroom with the live students, is taking attendance on the Career Pathways portal for the activity. But for something more intense, like a school-based enterprise, students are signing in and then collecting sheets and doing it at the end of the week. When you finally know who's attended, you can mark off manually or click that all are present or all are absent, working your way backwards for whoever is there. And you would click save. This would immediately give the hours of work-based learning to a student's employability profile. And without this step, there's no way of knowing if students actually participated in a work-based learning activity. And finally, before we take questions, if, let's say, for example, Emily or Manny was late to this activity, or they left early, sometimes for a good reason, you can adjust that appropriately, and students will only be credited for the time that's calculated from here. Pausing for clarifications or questions. Okay, we can always answer additional ones in a little bit. One other tool that's incredibly useful for schools is particular activity reports. There are a few different activity reports that you can automatically run when students are rostered. One of those is a summary report. This summary report details, who's involved, when is it happening, when are the sessions supposed to be, etc. The second report is a context report. This is an easy, quick way for you to provide to a chaperone or a facilitator emergency contact info from the Career Pathways portal directly, should we need to reach out to a particular student or their family, should something happen, or if we're trying to get connected with that scholar saying, where are you? What's going on? Our third report is automatically generated attendance sheets. These attendance sheets can come in handy if your facilitator or external partner doesn't have an account in the Career Pathways portal. They can easily mark off whether the person was present or absent. What I personally do is I have students initial whether they were there or not. And if they were absent, then the facilitator initials in the absent mark. And I collect these at the end of the week. So that way I can say, okay, let me go in and log it. And then lastly, my favorite report is the one that's used to summarize participation, which gives us the full list of students that were supposed to be part of this program, how many sessions they actually were a part of, and how many work-based learning hours should be notated on their employability profile based on this particular activity. So we can see that for Emily and Manny, they've attended one session, which was yesterday, and each of them got 1 hour each. Normally, the sessions are 2 hours, but one of them arrived an hour late, and one of them had to leave an hour early. And this is a great way for you to get the data that you need in case you're wondering, like, well, who's attending the most? Who's dropping off? How do I support chronic absenteeism for a longer type of activity? But if this was like a guest speaking activity, which is just a 1 day, 1 hour typically affair, you would get the exact same type of information. Any additional clarifications or concerns around recording activities? Because then we're going to do experiences. We have a question. Leave the writing in the chat, but you can feel free to unmute as well.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Sorry, we have a later day. I have a student that is participating, well, 2 of them that are participating in a workplace challenge right now, but they're also interested in the ISP for the February beginning, and I noticed they're not able to activate the application.
Great question. So typically students that are applying for an experience can apply at any time, but once they're enrolled in an experience, the general district policy has been around making sure that all youth equitably receive an experience. So typically, it's not about multiple experiences per youth per year. But students that are still interested in participating, if they previously submitted an application, they roll over from the fall to the spring. And in addition, if you're part of Future Ready NYC or Modern Youth, you'll also be asked to provide a specific roster to your liaison there. And so, even without the application, they'll have that this student should be considered for one.
Also wanted to add, we are considering, I think to Damiano's point, but also to your concern, Ms. Washington, that sometimes students might want to apply for multiple experiences within the school year, right? Which they cannot currently do because once they're on our roster, we do attempt to re-engage. However, we may be considering a slight format shift where students can identify multiple, I guess, seasons to apply for at one shot, right? To minimize this sort of an experience, because we do, we've had multiple students say like, hey, I'm doing an internship now, but I'd also like to apply for one in the spring, right? So to Damiano's point, from our end, from an equity stance, it was about allowing for new students to get the first opportunity. However, as we move forward and as we are engaging, I think more in terms of internship numbers, et cetera, that may be a policy that we revisit and shift.
Thank you, Desmond. And on the application for students that currently can access the application, they'll see a list of things like ISP grant internship, ISP grant workplace challenge, SWEF internships, SWEF workplace challenge, and there'll also be options for fall and spring. And summer's application is different, but good question.
Thank you.
Now, since we don't seem to have any questions at the moment about logging activities, the next thing and the last thing for today's session will be about putting students in the system for experiences. Now, when we say experiences, again, we're referring to workplace challenges, the stipended industry-based projects, the paid version of those, as well as any type of internship from both a safety and health standpoint, as well as a finance and legal standpoint. This process is different to ensure that students are being properly organized, school staff are covering their bases from a policy standpoint, and also that there's been more affirmative control over ensuring that all of our boxes have been checked before we provide young people with, an unescorted experience that's multiple days, that also involves some form of payment usually. We can break down this process into a few steps or categories, and they come from different directions. But before we do that, I wanted to highlight in the Career Pathways portal, Appendix B. Appendix B is the Career Pathways portal experience process. The things that I'm about to show you are exactly what I'm following here in the handbook. And so you'll see that here in step 1, I'm going to show you what that looks like. And this is the generalized typical process for both an internship and a industry-based project, a workplace challenge stipend, if you will. If you have questions, feel free to use the raise hand feature or drop something in the chat. And as we dive into it, we're going to start with what the employer or the host needs to do, then translate on over to what the school needs to do. And then finally, the last part usually has to do with the student. So unfortunately, it's not something easily done, but the good news is it's designed to protect you. It's designed to be relatively seamless once you get a hand of what the process is. So our first step in this process is going to be identifying who are we going to be working with. And when we talk about who we're going to be working with, we're specifically referring to the employer or the host. Now, a host in this case can be one of two things. It can be for an internship, which is often an external provider and should be in majority. And this could include organizations like the MTA, DIIT, your local auto shop, a hospital system, places where scholars are going to be getting career relevant skills through an internship experience. These hosts are going to need to register on what's known as the host portal. The host portal can be easily accessed from the same website that the staff go to with just a small change, which is adding the word hosts dot prior to the URL. So we as staff go to careerpathways.nyc, hosts go to hosts.careerpathways.nyc, and they get a prettier version of the website. We prioritize aesthetic for our partners and scholars. Here on the home page of the host portal, the host or the organization, the employer, will need to register. Now, if an organization has already registered in the past, they just need to log in. If they're already in the system, they do not need to register again. However, if they're struggling to figure out their login information, you as a school user can go to host organizations on the staff side and look up the information of who's been allowed to log in. So we have, for example, here Downtown Dental as an example of a potential host. And we can see that there's one person here who will have the ability to log in. I'm gonna pause for a moment. Nicole, I saw you unmute. Is there a question?
No, I just logged in from my phone instead. I'm sorry.
No problem,
Thank
no
you.
worries. And we can add up for hosts on their behalf additional users. Like, let's say this individual no longer works at Downtown Dental. That would, of course, lock out the rest of the organization from being able to log in. They might think, oh, I need to register again. We can look up in the system for them. We can support them. And the Sims team also has this information, as well as their username information. Should you need a second level of support for assisting that host getting logged in. We're going to assume in this scenario that the host in question doesn't have any idea if they have an account, and they're fairly certain that their organization has never registered. They will, of course, click register a new host and fill out the application as given. Now, we won't be going through every single page of the host application here, but what I can tell you is that in general, it's pretty self-explanatory. However, for hosts that seem like they're going to struggle or they need some form of assistance, you can offer support in one of two ways. You can do something very similar to what I'm doing with you now and share screening and collaboratively fill out the document together. Your partners will appreciate that you're taking the time to do this with them. And of course, it will ensure that they're actually doing it. Alternatively, if you're working with an organization that's pretty tech savvy and they kind of know what they're doing, if we go back to our Career Pathways Portal Handbook, I know it's haunting you, right? You can find in the portal an entire section dedicated to just hosts. So hosts also have their own visual narratives that will walk them through anything they can do in their part of the platform. And of course, if they need a video to follow along with, they've been pre-recorded and are available to them as well. So there are a few different ways we can ensure our hosts get in the platform. When the hosts do get in the platform, then we're ready for step number 2, and that is where we're going to make our next phase. One key note that is so important for us to recognize is that historically, or in the past, there was a paper version. At this point, the Department of Education no longer accepts paper versions of the host application. Everything for our hosts are now digital. We are trying to make sure that there's no loss of information, that there's no data about students or what they're going to do for students out there in the universe. And so centralizing it in the system is a way to protect our young people, as well as to ensure that the correct information is submitted. When an organization clicks submit, when they're done and they click I'm finished with my host application, they'll receive a message that states that their application has been submitted, and a Sims Borough manager will then receive a notification that the host has submitted an application. Now, it does take some time, typically 2 business days, for a Simsboro manager to review all of the host applications that are coming in the system from all of the high schools in New York City's partners. However, they will go into the system and approve it so long as there's no controversial or confusing information in their application. And for the most part, since we as schools are helping them fill it out, we should be pretty good. If for whatever reason the host is rejected, there will be a space that indicates why they were rejected, and those folks will be able to log into the Career Pathways portal from the host site and be able to update that information. When they update it, they should inform the school and or the Simsboro manager, who will reach out to you if there's an issue, to say, we fixed it, can you please reassess and approve it? This process is pretty seamless. I personally haven't had an issue with partners, but of course, I'm taking the method of supporting them through it one partner at a time. But you might also decide to do this as a group event, having all of your partners involved. But remember, once they're in as a host, they don't need to register again. Okay, but what does need to happen year after year is a site needs to be added for each host. Now, you might be wondering, well, what's the difference between a host versus a site? A host is the general organization. It is the large scheme of, this is a business that we would like to work with. A site is a specific instance, a specific copy of that host's information for that particular school year, for that particular school. Downtown Dental, as an example, may be a location where multiple schools are involved. And so each school acts independent of one another and therefore will need to do their own checks and balances to ensure that it's a safe and healthy environment and that the required duties of whatever intern is going to work with them are appropriate for the relationship between that organization and the school. And so to do that, you'll have to go ahead and add a new site if one hasn't been done for this school year. Again, school years are from July to the following June. So for example, if you're setting up summer stuff, there won't be any sites for you. If you're setting up something for the fall and you didn't do any summer programming in the Career Pathways portal, that means sites need to be created. When we add a site, for the most part, things will be relatively easy for you. We're going to ensure that we're linking it to our school. You'll be the only one on the list. And you'll see the host organizations that your school has previously worked with. For the example today, I'm going to go ahead and click Go Beyond. Now, Go Beyond has multiple locations. And so as part of our work as work-based learning coordinators, if students are going to physically be located at a particular branch or agency of a bigger organization, we have to make sure that that specific location is safe. And so for the purposes of this example, this internship, we're going to do the 100 Park Avenue address. Here we'll be asked to identify, some key information that has already majorly been imported. We have the address, we have the organization name. Is this for CTE programming or is it for non-CTE programming? And is this an internship site or is this a project site? Now, what project sites are the workplace challenges? And typically those will happen at your school, but from time to time, they may in fact happen at your industry location. And so, but depending on what you select here will depend on the next steps. If you select the standard option, which we're going to do here, you're going to be asked to do things like confirm that you visited the location. If you select a project, you're going to be asked to detail, well, what project your student's working on. Fortunately, they both look pretty the same. So unless you need like explicit directions between the two of them, which are available in the handbook, today we're just going to demo one of them. Now that the site has been created for this host, for this school year, for this school, we just want to update the information if anything's different. We can see that a lot of this information was readily pulled from what the host provided, but the host doesn't always update their details. So here we can see that the host has removed all of their site managers. So I need to confirm who is the person at Go Beyond for this school year that will be working with our young people. I will also need to confirm what types of interns or internship opportunities will there be for this school year. Okay, and then finally, I'm going to have to enter my site visit. I have to go and see this place, make sure it's safe. Fortunately, there's a pre-developed template that you can use to determine if this place has met all of the control qualifiers for it to be safe. When all of these details have been confirmed, you can you'll then have the ability to commit it. Committing works in the same way as when a host submits their application. The Sims borough managers will review the site and approve it if everything is looking good. If there's an issue, they'll communicate with you what needs to be revised. And once it's been revised, you'll then be able to get it to, you'll then be able to have it be approved, which means then you can use it. Pausing there for any clarifications or questions, because this is where we're going to speed up.
Damiano?
Yep.
Is this any different, so from putting in like a workplace challenge? I mean, not a workplace challenge, I'm sorry. Like it is a paid experience, like an internship versus a stipended experience. Like you enter it in the same way, is that true?
So the process that I've been showing for the moment is the internship process.
So it is different if you want to do a stipend. You don't do it just.
Yes. It's the exact same steps, except in that previous step, and I'll do it really quickly so that way we can see it. The only difference is we'll click project,
Okay.
and
Okay.
you'll see that instead of it asking like, well, who's the manager? What's the
Okay.
job? Because that's more like internship focus. It's asking like, well, what's the project kids are working on?
Okay, so standard is for internship and project is for a stipend.
Yeah, and I'm gonna have them revise those languages.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Okay,
Right,
thank
and
you.
I'm sorry, also, just to add to Damiano's point, once you pick project, now you're just, instead of having to do a separate scope of work and upload it per student, now you're just literally filling out that scope of work and it attaches to the student when you actually tag them to the experience. But that's upcoming.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do you
that
have any
works now.
advice on when you should put it as an internship versus when you should put it as a stipend?
So it matters on two things. One, it matters is it an internship or is it not an internship? And the other thing is like, how are students being paid? The primary decision should be the way that the experience is formatted. If students are
Okay.
working, they're doing an internship, then
Right.
that's what it should be marked as.
Okay,
It is fair to say though, and key to recognize that by definition, a workplace challenge or an industry-based project is not technically work. And so those
Right.
students do not have to provide a social security number, but they are limited to a stipend of up to $600.
okay, okay. All
And
right,
the other one is paid hourly as opposed to bulk.
sure. Okay. All right, because in the past, just for as an example, we have had students on the Youth Leadership Council for the Department of Buildings. And in the past, the 2 years that we participated with them, I think Gav always called it an internship. So I always kind of paid it out as an internship. But this year, I mean, but truly what they're doing like research projects. So to me, that's a workplace challenge. And I'd rather have them be paid for stipends. But in the past, I always kind of paid it as an internship. So I'm guessing like, but it's like literally the same program. Nothing changed about it.
Yeah.
Except for like the language. So I guess that's why I'm having trouble right now trying to figure out which route I should go.
The way
But
you described it, it sounds more of like a stipended project
Yeah,
situation.
right.
And that way, like when you get students involved, like you can enroll them now, and then you can just wait until the end to pay them the
Yes.
stipend at the end.
And that's exactly what I wanted to do. So that's why it sounds like a workplace challenge.
Right. And then the other thing is like, as opposed to like playing a guessing game with the amount of hours, like
Correct.
when you
Yep.
pick the stipend type, it'll ask you like, do you anticipate students getting 20, 40, or 60 hours from doing
Yes.
this?
Yep.
And so when you
Yeah.
pay them out, they'll get the right amount of hours.
That's correct. Yep. Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Here to solve problems. And speaking of problems, Mike in the chat is asking, is it okay to use the site for a full school year? Yes, no, sites should be used for the full school year. The main control for safety and health is that you need to do an annual site visit for safety and health. That's a state thing right there. And so you can use a site for summer, fall, and spring of the same school year. So it doesn't matter if you did go beyond in the summer and then you pick up back up with them in the spring. Like somebody on your team has vetted that that place is safe for this school year. Unless something drastic changes, then it's not okay. Like if they change physical locations or something. But if everything's the same, you should be fine. And we'll make sure that if there's any other documents like the New York Forward document, we can ask the district team to revise that. Very good point. There are a few other things that you need to do in the back end with students before you can do the final 2 steps. And so if you're doing an internship, you will need to make sure that students get their working papers, they do I-9 verification. If you're having students apply, they do have to do the application from their participant portal, and you can look up who's applied on the website. But if you're doing all of that external of the Career Pathways portal for right now, that's also pretty cool. The real question is, did you get students through the process so you know who's been selected for the opportunity, and do they have all the paperwork in place? That paperwork in place, of course, being working papers, I-9 verification, which has its own process, its own deal. And certainly the Sims team can provide you more information about upcoming blitzes and sessions and the ability to come to your school to I-9 verify many students at once. But the application itself isn't a requirement in the system, but it certainly can help you as a coordinator figure out, well, who's interested in some of my programming that I'm offering. The true matter of it all then becomes with creating an experience for a student, and that's where we'll close out. It's actually pretty simple once you've done it a few times. It's something that anybody who's used CTS or IMS, it's the same process. Nothing's changed, even if it's an industry project. Students have to have an account. That account needs to be complete, and we have to add an experience under their specific profile. The steps are relatively the same. We need to attach what initiative is this, what's the estimated hour count, and then we have to attach the money, and we have to attach the site that they're working at. So for this particular site, where are they working? And then for funding purposes, which as a school, most of you have access to SWEF, the Supplemental Work-Based Learning Experience Fund. And this is where you would add that. Now, in this demonstration, I'm using ISP funds. This wouldn't be what you're using. Yours would say SWEF, SWEF, and you would be able to add hours between 60 to 100 hours. If you want to offer an experience that goes beyond 100 hours, you can bring your case to your Sims Borough Manager and Desmond. There's no issue with offering specifically to students more experience hours. We just want to make sure from a district perspective that multiple students are given the opportunity to participate in an experience that's paid, and also that we're not just, blowing up a student's, available funding if they're not going to use it. And so as a preliminary restriction, it is 60 to 100 hours, but the team is very receptive to changes should you have a unique circumstance or a long-standing partnership, which like the Harbor School does with the Billy and Oyster Project, or Art and Design High School with some of their partners who are expecting and want longer internships. If all of that's said and good, and students have done their I-9 verification, the last step, and this is the end, students sign from their side of the portal. You as the coordinator sign from this side of the portal, and you need to wait 1 or 2 days for the Sims team to enroll them. Now, the Sims team will only enroll a student if everything on this list is cleared off, everything is filled in, and they have a training plan. Training plans work in the exact same way. You create the activity, you check off some boxes. What skills are they going to specifically tackle? You sign them, the kid signs them, the host signs them, and then they'll get the letter saying you can start working. Students shouldn't start working at their internship until they receive the notification of enrollment. From a legal and health perspective, we want to make sure that nobody is anywhere they're not supposed to be until authorized. And from a financial perspective, we don't expect kids to work for free, but they have to work the hours that we give them. They can't just decide, well, I'm starting today. The system has to say that it's okay. The partner has to say it's ready to go. If all of these steps are followed, you'll have kids in their experiences having a good time. And you can refer to our other training sessions and resources that break down how to approve students' payroll, your timesheets, etc. But all in all, this session has broken down the difference between the two different types of work-based learning opportunities in the Career Pathways portal, activities versus experiences, and in general, how to set them up. If there are additional questions, I will remain here. However, we are at time, so to respect all of you, feel free to go off, enjoy the rest of your day. And we'll stop the recording here.